So Australia is rewriting its national environment laws right now. The government says reform is long overdue and that this is the best opportunity in decades to pass a modern, balanced set of laws that protect our environment. And everyone seems to agree. That's why, according to recent polling, Australians overwhelmingly want these laws to consider the impact of climate change on our environment. Because most Australians understand that one of the biggest threats to our environment, whether it's in the Great Barrier Reef, East Coast flooding, or southern algal bloom, is climate change. So you'd expect these laws to have serious considerations of climate change in them, right? Let me give some background. These environment laws set the guidelines for how projects that will impact our natural environment, whether that's gas extraction or solar farms, are assessed, ultimately whether the government allows them or doesn't. The proposed laws mean things like endangered species, heritage areas, and significant waterways must be considered in these decisions. However, they do not require the consideration of the emissions produced by approved projects, emissions that we know harm the environment. So far, all these laws do is make companies report some, only some, of their emissions, but it does not permit the government to take this information into account when deciding whether a project will go ahead or not. Now, here you might say, okay, well, they're not required to consider emissions, but, Murray's a nice guy, maybe he'll do it anyway. That won't happen because specifically in the legislation, there's a clause that requires the minister to not consider matters that they're not required to. You can see this perfectly illustrated in how the Woodside gas expansion happened. In Murray Watt's decision brief, this legislation specifically cited as to why this project went ahead, even though everyone knew it was going to produce heaps of emissions. If you've been listening to your local Labor MP though, you've probably heard of this bill as a major step forward for our climate.
Modernising our environmental laws to meet the urgency of the climate crisis.
At the last two elections, they voted for progress on climate. This bill represents the most significant reform in a generation.
The steps proposed in this bill will go a long way to making a difference to protecting our environment. Australians have made it clear twice that when it comes to the environment, they want progress, not politics.
But the details tell a completely different story. The law doesn't give the government power to factor in climate harm when approving new coal and gas projects or any projects at all. We know that climate-driven disasters are what's damaging our reefs, forests, rivers and communities, but these laws don't reflect that. And voters think that's as strange as it sounds. As I mentioned earlier, recent YouGov polling by the Climate Council finds that 70% of Australians think the impacts of climate change should be considered when approving new fossil fuel projects. The law is still in draft form, and it can't get through the Senate unless Labor makes a deal, either with the Coalition or with the Greens. Some in Labor want to negotiate with the Coalition, who only just last week abandoned Australia's 2030 emissions target and backed new public funding for coal. The whole situation puts Labor in a tough position. They want to keep the seats they won last election, seats like Griffith and Brisbane, won from the Greens, and seats like Fremantle and Bean, where independents are competitive. And in communities like these, voters are clear. Climate pollution should be regulated by environment laws, not left out, not delayed, and definitely not traded away. Yet, right now, the bill being proposed doesn't give the government power to even consider climate pollution when approving new fossil fuel projects.